and sat in Jefferson Davis's chair that same day. Five days later, just 5 days after that walk in Richmond, he got word that Lee had surrendered, the war was over. The day he surrendered, the Confederates had about 8,000 soldiers. The U.S. had 60,000 soldiers. Now, Lee's army was divided. Jeb Stuart was still fighting. But that's the word that Lincoln got on that day. The surrender took place at the Appomattox Courthouse. Present were a number of people. Next picture. And one of those people is Robert Lincoln. He was a captain aide to U.S. Grant. He was present in the room when that surrender was signed. Also present was General George Armstrong Custer in the same room. He was one of his few degrees of separation. When they surrendered, Lee rode down the road to meet Grant because he had given out word that he was coming on to surrender. Waited a long time. Completely dressed as a Southern gentleman soldier, complete dress uniform, red sash, sure-metal sword, ready to surrender, all the gentlemen. It took a long time for Grant to arrive. Finally arrived, mud from head to foot, private uniform, slouch hat. What a contrast. But that's when the surrender happened. 5 days later, April 10, there was a crowd that came to the White House, some 2,000 or 3,000 people, wanted a speech. Lincoln said, come back tomorrow, come back another time, I can have time to prepare a speech. But one thing he did was he had the Marine Band play Dixie. He said, we captured it, it's ours. I always liked that tune. People came back the next day on April 11th in a larger crowd. But included in that crowd were the conspirators, John Wilkes Booth, and at least 2 of his gang, as I'll call them. Booth wanted to pay him, and was paying to shoot Lincoln on the spot. But he said, no, too many people. And here's what Booth said to his partner. That speech means nigger citizenship. Now, by God, I'll put him through. That's the last speech he'll ever give. And it was. I have a quote from this book called Manhunt. And this takes us back even further. 4 years earlier, Abraham Lincoln was running for office, or ready to be inaugurated the first time. And here's what he said to one of his friends. I've never had the feeling politically that did not spring from the Declaration of Independence. Due time, the weight should be lifted from the soldiers' shoulders of all men, and that all should have an equal chance. Can this country be saved on that basis? If this country cannot be saved without giving up on that principle, I would rather be assassinated on this spot than surrender. That was 1861. And one of the many ironies in this whole story. Lincoln, at this point, was one of the most protected men in the country, which makes this whole story incredible. He had many death threats during the war. In fact, his pigeonhole desk in his office had 80 of those threats stuck in the pocket. And that doesn't count the ones that his mail clerk had burned. Lincoln often said to his cabinet and friends that he was worried about him being assassinated and his word for his safety. He said, if I am killed, I can only die once. But to live in dread is to die over and over again. For example, including up to 1864 and 65, there were many conspiracies. There were many people that hated Lincoln, and lots of Southern sympathizers. Here's a clip from the Wisconsin Democrat paper. This is the most rottenest, most stinking, ruin-working smallpox ever conceived. He's usurped the nation. usurp power, suspension of sacred writs, worthless currency, a ruined nation, desolate cities. And that's from the northern state of Wisconsin. Next door was the state of Maryland, a border state. Only a border state because the Potomac River divided it, and people would go hard to keep it from seceding. There were lots of secession, what's called secession. Lower Maryland was known as the land of devoted Confederates. There were many conspiracies to either kidnap or kill him. So from about 1863 on, there was a cavalry troop that escorted him everywhere. In the summertime, he and Mary and family would go out to the soldiers' home on a hill outside Washington, where it was cooler and not so hot. That army escort of 20-some soldiers escorted him every time. And in addition, there was an army barracks built on the White House ground to house the troop to help protect him. Next photo. I show this picture because this man was named Lord Hill Lamont. He was from Illinois. He was a lawyer. He was a good friend of Lincoln's. And he appointed himself as Lincoln's personal bodyguard, often warning Lincoln not to go out, especially at night. It got so that Lincoln didn't want him to be doing that, but he wouldn't quit and he wouldn't refuse, so Lincoln made him the Marshal of Washington, D.C. And he often slept himself on the floor outside Lincoln's bedroom. Unfortunately, on April 16th, he was in Richmond, Virginia. He was not at the White House. He was not in Washington. But in 1864, the Metropolitan Police in Washington also provided security for Lincoln. They had 4 men stationed at the White House 24/7. Now to talk about the conspirators. Booth began his plans in August of 1864 to kidnap Lincoln. Bought rope, bought a wagon, bought weapons. They were going to kidnap him, wrap him up, drunk him in a blanket or a carpet, put him in a wagon and haul him south, and exchange him in ransom for all the Confederate prisoners. That was his plan. Also that year in October, he traveled to Canada to meet with Confederate agents. They paid him $1,500 and gave him an introduction letter to Confederate leaders in the South. Some of his other, I call gang, also went to Canada. But who was this actor really? Photo, next photo. Oops, that's the right one. It's all right. We'll talk about his conspirators when we go to the next slide. That's kind of a bad picture, but that's 4 of the principals. He had about 8 people that he was working with on the conspiracy, but those are the main ones. He was a real ladies' man, but a second-rate actor. These are the conspirators, 4 of them. Next pictures. We should have separate pictures of each of them. Mary Surratt, who was in a boarding house in Washington where they met, along with her son, who was a Confederate spy. The next one is Lewis Payne or Lewis Powell, former Confederate soldier wounded in Gettysburg. Baptist preacher's son. Next one, David Harold, pharmacist assistant. The next one, George Astroff, who was a German immigrant, a painter, but also a drunk. So let's talk about Booth again. He was born in Bel Air, Maryland, 1838. His father was Junius Booth. And his heritage maybe gives us some idea of how he developed. Junius Booth lived in England, was a famous actor in England. He lived there with his paramour and mistress, age 19. left a wife and a child in England, came to Maryland, lived out in country in Maryland, and they had 10 kids. He became a very famous actor in America. Traveled all over the country, including California. His oldest son, Edwin, who went on to become a very famous actor himself, traveled with him as a teenager. Mainly his main job was to keep his dad sober, if he could, so he could get on stage. Some of the children became actors, notably Edwin and John Wilkes, but they didn't see eye to eye, and they weren't nearly comparable in talent. John toured Alabama in 1860 and became a Southern sympathizer. Edwin stayed in the North and became a lot more famous. Booth admitted at this point that he was a spy for the Confederates. John Wilkes Booth, told his sister he considered slavery one of the greatest blessings. My love is for the South alone. Another example of the two brothers, Edwin, who was older and quite famous, was a supporter of John Brown when he captured in Virginia. So he supported John Brown, but guess what his younger brother did? He loved to be an actor, loved to be dramatic, wore a uniform, and he was present for John Brown's hanging. But he wasn't in the military, he borrowed a uniform, but that was his way to be active and be dramatic. A quote from this book called Conspiracies, and talks about John Wilkes Booth. He was neurotic. He was a mediocre scion of distinguished acting family and the unworthy brother of great Edwin Booth. He was an embittered Southerner who had never forsworn his Union allegiance, but he never served in the Confederate Army or put himself in an inconvenience for the South. When he shot Lincoln, it was this final insane act of a man 26 years old who had been weak and futile and who was a second-rater in his own profession and who wanted to win the glaring floodlight of notoriety. He was extremely afraid of his father. His father was very demanding, stern, aggressive, a drunk. Years were scarred by eccentricities, sudden appearances by his father, then disappearances. And then when he was home, he stormed about, criticized everything, then he was going to be gone. Another writer talked about this actor, this John Wilkes Booth. He was a big joke on stages in the North. He hated to read prompt books. He was widely known for forgetting his lines. He could never learn the secret of good acting. He fantasized sometimes that he'd complete his act of kidnapping Lincoln in the theater so the whole world would know when he gets out of publicity. In early 1864, he recruited these people. As I said, Payne was a dad was a Baptist preacher, and then a Confederate soldier. I'm going back again to my timeline. April 10 was when, or April 11th when he gave his speech from the balcony. Lincoln gave a speech. But he also on that same day had a cabinet meeting, and here's another one of the ironies of this story. This is quoting Lincoln. Is this what he told his cabinet? And he had told Mary the day before. I had this dream. 10 days ago I fell into slumber. Soon began to dream. A death-like stillness about me. I heard subdued sobs, as if a number of people were weeping. I wandered downstairs. Wondered were invisible. No living person in sight. It was light in all the rooms, every object familiar. Who were they grieving, and who, as if their hearts would break? They kept on until I reached the east room. I met a sickening surprise. A Catholic altar, or course, or coffee, on which rested a corpse. Soldiers acting as guards. Who was dead in the White House, I demand? The president. He was killed by an assassin. This is April 11, a week before he died. Mary fussed at him about that, telling that terrible story. He said, Mary, don't worry, it was only a dream. It was not me, but some other fellow that they killed. Another one was many ironies about this story. Next slide. This is a map of the city of Washington in 1865. It's a small city, I think there were about 60,000 people. Everything was close. The White House, up here, Ford's Theater only 7 blocks away. The National Hotel where Booth was living and staying was there. The Seward House,